April Berg coming to you with Kitchen Conversations. I am so excited to have you here with me today and the amazing Erin Jones. She is an author, she is an educator, she is literally in those streets talking to students across not just our state, but across the country. So I'm going to let Erin talk a little bit about what she's been up to lately and why she's sitting down with us today to talk about education.
Hey, April, thank you so much for having me again on your show. Crazy year. Last year, this time, actually last week, last book, I had a book published called Bridges to Heal Us, and it is really my strategies for people to think about racial healing in this country in a way that invites people not aggressive. It's more an invitation to have conversations. And so without doing any promotion on the road, the book was designed to be read by 13 and older, 12, 13. I've been talking in schools with students about racial identity and gender identity and sexuality, businesses and nonprofits and colleges, and literally the gamut across the country. Everything about the pandemic was I lost all of my schoolwork when school shut down. The beautiful online, and was then exposed to new opportunities all over the country, requiring me to fly places. But I love being able to inspire young and old, do that every day now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for that book. If folks at home have not read her book or seen it, I was blessed to see you speak at a conference. They had your books there. It was a complete crush of people trying to grab copies. And I will say it's very inviting, right? It's the kind of read where thank you for writing it for like 13-year-olds and up, because for someone like me, it was easy to really engage with and get into. And that's why I wanted to discuss with you education and where we are right now. And so we're at this stage in the pandemic where schools are open, right? We're back to quote unquote normal, but there's been an impact, and there's been an impact by school closures. That impact has been on kiddos' education, and I just want to ask you, how do we make our kids whole? How do we make them healthy in this moment?
So I think number one, it's really important for people to understand there's nothing. I was telling you before we started recording that I think this last year was the involved in education, and I've been doing this work for 32 years. I think last year was harder than the year before. And I think one of the reasons it was harder is that for a year, sometimes a year and a half, either being supervised by parents, they were exposed to a lot of things on social media because they had more time, their phones in their hand anywhere for a year. And so, my skill set is really with middle school. 10 to 14 is my favorite age group. Those young people were 7 at a time without supervision, without a lot of monitoring. And so they were being exposed to that have caused them some harm. They were exposed to content, violent and negative. There was a lot of pressure to show up a particular way and likes. And if you didn't get that, do I really matter? They really lost the ability there. And so even once school started, there were a lot of students that preferred wearing the mask, and you would see students, in December of this last school year, with hoods out. All you could see was their eyes.
Yeah.
And they were really hiding. And it just that students spend in upper elementary, middle school trying to figure out who they are, and that awkwardness, know where to play that out when they were at home. And so there are young people that have time to figure who am I and how am I showing up in the space. And then, by the way, we also tested of the worst season in our nation's history. Possibly, we're asking students to what they know academically, and they're just trying to figure out, am I going to live to tomorrow? And so, one of the things I've talked a lot with administrators about is get kids back connecting to themselves authentically. And so the importance of social emotional learning and mental health is really, really critical right now.
Yeah, and thank you for that because I think the power that I see in your words is that you are boots on the ground, right? You're in schools talking to students, talking to staff, talking to parents. And we've been through this horrific pandemic, but to your point, our students, they've kind of reverted kind of internally and you know, they're external on social media in places that aren't necessarily the healthiest without kind of that adult and I wouldn't even say adult, but just that mentorship or that loving supervision to say, this is the right way to go, this is not the right way to go. And I think as a result, frankly, we're kind of now in this twindemic situation where we've got violence. And when I say violence, I'm talking specifically about gun violence. And it is the leading cause of death for young folks in America. The tragedy in Uvalde was the latest example. And of course, it shined this huge spotlight nationally on what we know being in schools is a crisis. But specifically, I want to talk about or ask you, right? It's not just about the violence itself from guns potentially coming in schools. It's the fear, and so you're talking about kids who were scared at home, scared about being sick and getting sick. Now they're back in school and they're scared about getting hurt in school. So what can we be doing in our state to not only just keep them safe, but mentally keep them whole in this moment of a twindemic?
Yeah. Things that go into that I'm going to put into my answer because I think this if we talk about Uvalde, let's also talk about Buffalo.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Kyle Rittenhouse
Yep.
and white males. You know, often black and brown boys as being really violent, and there is that too, in a different way. Young white males who are disenfranchised as well, and so the violence in schools. There are multiple sides to this. So we've got to think about who are the students that are turning to violence, and then there are other students that are feeling disconnected and turning inward completely from any type of
Yeah.
social interaction. We've got to address both of those groups. The only way to get our students healthy and in spaces that are safe
Hmm.
physically is seen and heard and known and loved and valued. And I would offer Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't know the Uvalde shooter. I don't know the Buffalo shooter, but I've taught 32 years. I've worked with 16, 17, 18-year-olds for 32 years. Men were disconnected. I know they
Hmm.
didn't feel seen, but how many other students don't? The most important things we can do in education space is make sure that our classrooms aren't so big that teachers need to actually know students,
Yeah.
that students feel safe in classrooms to know their peers, that they feel good at something, that when they show up in school, it's not this place where, oh, I don't know how to do.
Yeah.
I was just with an art teacher on Sunday, and we were to budget cuts. We always pull art and music out of schools, and that's often the thing that keeps
Yep.
is
Keeps
those
them connected.
creative pursuits, right? And so
Hmm.
that's those are pieces of legislation had schools so that they get those extra like
Yep.
non-academic things that really to school. And so when I think about violence in schools, we're not talking about in the news the numbers of students that I had the opportunity to serve in Washington who had their heads kicked in by people for being
Hmm.
gay, who got thrown because they were black. Um, we're not hearing about those in the news, but those are
Yeah.
happening to students at the same levels as the very, very public shooting
Yep.
violence in words and action in schools in the state of Washington that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and so exactly where I was kind of going with this thread, right? So another conversation around school buildings are things about certain bills in certain states, like Florida's regressive and frankly hateful "Don't Say Gay" bill. And when I talk to colleagues and I talk to voters in our state, they say, you know, that's Florida. That can't happen here. That can't happen in Washington State. There's just no way around it. But I'm going to ask you a question. For the young LGBTQ students in our state, what can we be doing to make them feel safer? And do you buy into that that's a Florida thing, that's a Texas thing,
It's not a Florida thing.
Yeah.
No. So here's what I about this yesterday, and on my public Facebook page, I literally posted a really long post yesterday. Like, there's Florida and Texas and Missouri right now
Mm-hmm.
that have legislation encourages parents to report educators who are talking about race
Wow.
and sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would argue that anytime you talk about heterosexual marriage too, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
double standard, right? But even though those encouraging parents to report teachers, and I don't believe we'll ever have that kind of Washington at the state level, there are
Mm-hmm.
school boards in our state making decisions and writing pieces of legislation that will have similar implications for our students, in particular our trans students.
Yes.
And there are school districts legislation written. I work with a number of teachers who identify as LGBT, and it's been made very clear to them that they are not to talk about their partners. I know one of my is married, lesbian married, was told to take the pictures down.
Mm-hmm.
This is happening right in our state, and so we have to be really. We need more people that are paying attention to the school board meetings and what's happening in school boards. The numbers in our state that are being threatened to be banned. In fact, I don't think in our state, but there have been a number of school districts in the state of Washington that have made threats to be able to get the number of votes to make that happen. But it's a reality here, and so people need to. One of the things that I shared in my post yesterday is, number one, I don't understand trans identity threatens you at all.
Yeah.
So I'm having lots of conversations about that. Why is that student's non-binary identity? Why is it such a threat to you that the very mention of it can't understand that? But I would encourage people to have conversations. Talk to your neighbors who are really conservative and just have conversations. The other thing that families have a family member who is trans or who is lesbian, who wondering, there's a different way that even conservative families show up. It's about, are there opportunities for you to connect people to folks in communities that are different from your story, connected to a name? There's a different way that people tend to show up. Not always, but tend to engage.
No, 100%. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's something we don't talk enough about is our staff, and how this impacts our staff and how they're not able to be their authentic selves in the workplace. And to your point, as a heterosexual staffer in a school, you would never be told to take down your wedding pictures and things like that. But that also plays into students being able to be their authentic selves, and they see, right? They learn by watching people model behavior, and if they see their LGBTQ staffers and teachers being told to hold it on the inside, don't share this piece of you, this important human piece of you, then our kids are going to really internalize that in a negative way. So I'm glad you brought that point up. I also know that there's a through line from where because we talked last season specifically, we had a whole show on CRT. And we talked about what it was, defined it. You were amazing. People reached out and said, "Thank you, Erin Jones, for helping define this moment," because it was very it was just a lot of confusion and misinformation. So walk me through the through line from where we are, or where we were with those conversations on CRT, and where we are now with conversations about our trans youth and our LGBTQ youth.
So the whole anti-critical race theory conversation began Minneapolis. Shortly after the Black Lives Matter protests began across the world, really. It's the first time that people have marched in honor of Black lives in the United States. And it was really about a month and a half after that Christopher Rufo a show and talked about how all racial be canceled. And he described some trainings in Seattle that were happening. And he's from Gig Harbor, by the way, for where. And he got the ear of President Trump at the time, who banned on racial equity from any federal. So no federal agencies were allowed to. Technically, they were not allowed to have any training on race and equity. And that kind of number of school boards passing laws, and this has happened in the state of Washington too. School against any mention of race and ethnicity in school spaces, not allowing teachers to talk about this. Well, one of the things, and you can actually go through Christopher Rufo tweets about CRT, and he basically says in the middle of, I am going to make single-handedly everything that we don't like as Republicans, I'm going to make, and we're going to call it CRT. And so anytime anyone mentions CRT, and he says, here's what I'm going to do to start a movement. Well, he just came out with a tweet, I want to say low, that said, the next iteration of this movement is gender identity.
Wow.
And he's about to put out a series. It hasn't set, but be watching. Christopher Rufo is very intentionally going to start a campaign, conversations about gender identity, any conversations about sexuality.
So, and I just want to, talk to you and also folks watching this. Maya Angelou said, when someone tells you who they are, believe them, right? I mean, and so we're sitting here having this conversation a year after we talked about CRT, and we're in a post-Roe world. Now, I think about a year ago, Erin, when me and you talked, and if I'd even said, oh, what if Roe v. Wade gets overturned or what, we both would have probably right? We would have said, what are we talking about here? Like, that's not a thing. And that, yes, we have to be aware of reproductive rights, but that won't be a thing. Well, it is a thing, right? We're in a post-Roe world where, our daughters have less rights than us at the same age. And so I just take that back to what you said. And I want folks to really understand that this is a concerted, methodical effort to come after our youth. And it's much like, again, CRT, and now we're talking about gender identity, and it's about pushing an agenda in a methodical and strategic way that, unfortunately, as we've seen with Roe, can be successful. So I think in this moment, I think about some of the school boards in the north area of our state, that I have the pleasure of representing, and some of them are having those conversations. And so I guess, for what your opinion on how do we combat this notion that we should be ideologically neutral, right? That we can't talk about anything. Like, how as a parent, as an activist, as a student, how do we combat that notion?
Nobody is. We all have biases. All of us do. Every single human being. There's no such thing as objectivity. No teacher chooses. Every news channel has a perspective. And I think our number one duty is to be critical thinkers, to think critically about things, to be able to defend whatever you believe. Tell students what to believe. Like, it's not my job to tell them you should be pro-choice or pro-life, but it is okay if you say you're pro-choice. Why? Where's your defense? Where's the science? If you say you're pro-life, what's your reasoning? That's my job as a teacher, is to teach them how to defend, to engage in hard conversations. And when we pull certain conversations off the table, limiting the ability for our students to develop really critical skills that they are going to need. I would argue that too many adults didn't get these skills either. Gifts of having gone to the school that I went to as a a high school student where we really tough. I mean, I went to school with the Israeli ambassador and the Palestinian ambassador's kid conflict.
Wow.
Like it was right in my classroom. These children going to school together. We had some things, and we didn't shy away from it. We were never told that you can't talk about war or
Mhm.
Islam
Mhm.
or Judaism.
Interesting.
We were encouraged to engage and to believe. Here's why I believe it. Here's the evidence that I have. And I think
Mhm.
about why I'm a teacher because I believe every child deserves that. And I
Yeah.
don't think every child or every teacher, but every person should be able to defend what they believe. And that's what a true democracy is. Everyone wants to believe.
Yeah.
We can't have a democracy. And schools are public schools
Yeah.
are built an effective democracy.
And that, thank you for sharing that story. I didn't know that. I knew about your international upbringing and the amazing opportunities that you were able to engage in, but I can just envision you sitting in a classroom with two students on the polar of whose families, right, are working kind of in this polar opposites of geopolitical sphere, and yet there is a place for conversation and for context, and everything is still on the table, to your point, so that we can think critically about it and make decisions. Because every child, and I say this openly, every child is a world leader. And so if we start treating our children as if we can't talk to them about world issues, world history, not allowing them to be their authentic selves, then we are in a place that is truly anti-democratic. So and just to kind of land this conversation, right, we're talking about public schools and the power of public education for society as a whole. And I look at, we didn't talk about the Supreme Court decision around prayer in school, but when you mentioned the Palestinian leader's child in the classroom with you, I'm thinking, that child was more than likely maybe of a different faith than Christianity or Judaism, right? And so when we talk about having prayer, quote unquote, in school, it's a specific type of prayer, right? It's something we know what that's a dog whistle for. So just landing this conversation, the place of public education, who is it serving? Why is it serving folks? And how do we keep it going? How do we gird up our staff, our students, and our families?
Well, one of the things that my husband is a head football coach that, and he was a former youth pastor in a Christian church, but my best friend is Muslim, and Baha'i and Jewish and atheist, and so I've spent a lot of time navigating between and experiences in it. Our public schools should be places where every child can, and I would offer, as
Mm-hmm.
someone who's been in spaces with Muslim pray 3 times a day and watching American Christian leaning educators response to them in ways are that this would be a whole different conversation about the Bremerton coach had he been a Muslim, a language other than English.
Yes.
This would be a
Yeah.
very different conversation. So with equity, that anyone can pray any kind of prayer in a school. Parents, to me at least, is that particular kinds of prayer are okay in school. But if prayer should be okay in school, someone who
Mm-hmm.
worships Satan, like a satanic, and I know we had Tacoma schools at one point. If we're going to have a Christian club, we can also have a satanic, and they had to. We've not thought about that perspective. So
Yeah. No, it's true.
how
It's true.
do we create space? You don't get to decide what is okay for children to believe. That's
Mhm.
for children, and also can't eliminate certain perspectives because you don't agree with them. That's not
Exactly.
democracy. The insofar as it is willing to embrace every person. Now that's not an easy thing, and yet
Yeah.
we can't raise up here cisgender heterosexual illness. We can't lift that up here and say that if you don't do everything according to these bad,
Yeah.
we have to create spaces where everyone can have open dialogue and everyone are.
Absolutely. And that's the point of public education. And that's the point of having a society that's strong, innovative, and successful, is because everyone should have access to an education that allows them to be their full authentic selves, and that does not put guardrails around learning, right? So this is, you might not agree, but you got to learn it. It's history, it's where we came from, and that will absolutely inform where we're going. So I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I think the last thing, if you want to leave our viewers with, what can they do, what can I do at home as a mom, or maybe as a grandparent, or as a neighbor in community, to help uplift our public schools in this moment, specifically? Like, are there things that we can do to really encourage our teachers?
So, number one, if you're a parent or not on your technology more than you are face to face with your children,
Hmm.
something really different for our children. And too often, as I see parents in restaurants and stuff, they are their children are, and children need to see your eyes. They need to have that physical connection. So do that. If you're not a parent, but you love young people, offer to mentor our young, as many
Hmm.
adults. And what the research says is every young person needs at least 2 or 3 adults, their story, and are going to be their champions. And so if you don't have any kids at home, if you're like me, and
Hmm.
find a couple kids that you can mentor. So I
Yeah.
mentor 2 or 3 students right now. It's now find a place to mentor. Go into your schools and say, hey, you know what? I have, how could I be useful in your school? Or, hey, I'd love to cook. Could I cook breakfast for the staff once a month?
Yep.
Find out ways that you can support your school and really tangible. 3 or 4 friends could band
Yeah.
together and cook a meal for staff, or just show up at school. There are,
Yeah.
it's the little things that really matter. You don't have to do many really big things, and your school administrators and school communities knowing you're there for them, that you're going to
Hmm.
not agree always with them, but just knowing that they have people who love them and care about their well, critical.
Thank you for that, because those are real, tangible things that people can do. And I think sometimes, we have these conversations, and it's like, okay, what do I do now? But also, thank you, because I think every time we talk, I come up with what I call a T-shirt quote. And so the T-shirt quote I got from today, I was just writing it down, is children need to see your eyes. And as a parent, right, like, I'm really, that I'm gonna have to sit with that, because yeah, I've got my device, and sometimes I'm looking down at that, and not, and I'm listening to my kiddos, but I'm doing my thing. But children need to see your eyes. So I'm taking that away from today's conversation. Erin, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for your advocacy in community. You're an educator, you're an author, but I think of you as just the most amazing advocate for our children, for our school districts, and frankly, for public schools across the country. So thank you for that. And hopefully you'll join us next season, and we'll be talking about some other education issues, because it's never a dull moment. Yes.
That it's not. Best
Awesome.
wishes to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone at home, for watching. It's been great to share this moment with you. We will see you next time right here on Kitchen Conversations. Have a great day.